veteran bought a $200 cabin. Near an old mine, a midnight bark revealed a secret hidden 60 years. Brutus didn't bark often, not unless a life was on the line. So the night he jolted awake, stared into the darkness and growled like he'd found a ghost with a heartbeat. Logan knew something buried for decades had just woken up. He just didn't know it would rewrite a 60-year lie. Logan Hale had expected silence up here. Real silence. The kind that pressed into your ribs and made the world feel far away. That was exactly why he bought the cabin for $200, a number so low the county clerk wouldn't even meet his eyes when she slid him the deed. People didn't buy property beside the abandoned Silver Elk mine, not unless they didn't know the stories, or didn't care. Logan fell into the second category. He pushed open the warped front door, the hinges crying out as if they hadn't moved in decades. Brutus padded in first, big shoulders rolling beneath his thick coat, nose low, tail steady. The retired military K-9 had walked battlefields with Logan, cleared alleys in Helmand, dragged him from dust and smoke more times than Logan liked to admit. Now he moved through the cabin with the same slow, tactical caution. "Scout it out, buddy," Logan muttered, dropping his duffel on the floorboards. The cabin was nothing but bones. Cold stone hearth, splintered pine walls, a roof patched with tin and prayer. But the place had a strange pull to it. Logan felt it the moment he stepped inside, a hum under the floorboards, like the air wanted to say something but hadn't found the words yet. Brutus sniffed once at the kitchen doorway, once at the old desk in the corner, then returned to the center of the room. Logan started sweeping sawdust and mouse droppings into a pile. It felt good to do something mindless, something simple. No uniforms, no gunmetal smell, no sirens. He had just eased onto a wooden chair near the dormant fireplace when Brutus froze. No warning, no bark. The dog's entire body locked in place, ears flattening, tail lowering. His gaze fixed on the cold stone hearth as if someone were standing inside it. Logan felt it instantly, that old heat rising in his chest, the instinct honed by years of learning that Brutus never reacted without cause. "What is it, boy?" Brutus didn't look at him. Instead, a low growl rose from deep in his chest, not from his throat, from somewhere older. It vibrated through the floorboards. The cabin's draft seemed to hold its breath. Logan straightened slowly. "Hey, easy." But the dog didn't ease. Outside, wind swept down from the ridge, rattling the window pane with a sharp, icy clatter. Snowflakes spun past the glass, thick and fast, the kind of storm that swallowed roads before midnight. Logan hadn't even unpacked fully. His rucksack sat by the door. The crowbar he bought from a second-hand tool shop leaned against the wall. He followed Brutus's stare to the hearth, ordinary at first glance. Old stone, loose mortar. The faint smell of ash from a fire burned decades ago, but the air near it felt strange, heavy, like someone had been breathing into the stones. "Okay," Logan murmured. "Let's take a look." He crouched beside Brutus, steadying a hand on the dog's back. The muscles there trembled, not in fear, but readiness. Good. Disciplined readiness. Brutus was back on deployment, and Logan could feel the past tightening its grip around them both. He touched the stone at the base of the fireplace. Cold, rough. Then, as he brushed a second stone, Brutus growled again. Shorter, sharper. A warning. The same warning he'd given seconds before, saving Logan from stepping on a pressure plate overseas. Logan's breath hitched. That memory slammed into him so fast he nearly pulled his hand back like he'd touched fire. "All right," he whispered. He stood, crossed the room, and grabbed the crowbar. The storm groaned against the tin roof as he returned, heart tightening in his chest. Brutus didn't move, just watched. Logan slid the crowbar into the thin seam of mortar. The first tap echoed dull. The second two. Then a third. A hollow thump. He froze. Brutus's ears twitched. Hollow meant empty space. Empty space behind a sealed stone. Logan repositioned the bar, pushed harder. The mortar didn't crumble like old dust. It cracked like a lid being pried open after too long. The sound was soft, but the kind that made your spine tighten. The stone shifted. Logan pulled with both hands. It slid free with a grind of rock on rock and dropped onto the floor beside him. Behind it was a cavity. Dark, dry, cold enough to sting his fingertips. He clicked on his flashlight and aimed the beam inside. A metal box. Army green. Heavy gauge steel. The kind used in the early 60s. Beside it, 3 leather-bound notebooks, tied with a cord so brittle it snapped as soon as Logan lifted them out. Dust curled through the air. Brutus stepped closer, no longer growling, but watching with laser focus. Logan set the notebooks on the floor, then pulled the metal box free. It was heavier than he expected. Much heavier. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he flipped open the first journal. Neat handwriting. Block letters. The kind used by people trained to record things carefully. Howard McLean. Mining engineer. Silver Elk operations. 1963. Logan's pulse stumbled. McLean was the man locals whispered about, the engineer who vanished the same year the mine collapsed. Some said he ran away. Some said he fell. Some said the company paid to make him disappear. Logan kept reading. They think the water is harmless, but the animals won't drink it. Someone's been digging at night near Shaft 9. They told me to stop asking questions. Brutus let out a soft sound behind him. A rumble, low and steady. Logan turned to look at him. You smell something? Brutus didn't blink. Logan's breath fogged in the cold cabin. Air. He felt the weight of the journal in his hand. Felt the weight of 60-year-old fear rising off the page. And in that moment he understood something with a clarity that cracked through him like ice splitting underfoot. He hadn't found this secret. Brutus had. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin. Inside, the air felt thick with a story that had finally surfaced after 6 decades of silence. And Logan Hale knew one thing. Someone had hidden this truth for 60 years. And someone else might still be watching. By morning, the cabin felt different. Not warmer, not safer. Just awake, as if the night had peeled something back and left the walls listening. Logan stepped into the main room with a mug of coffee steaming in his hand, but the moment he saw Brutus, every muscle in his body locked. The dog stood planted in front of the fireplace again. Same stance as the night before. Ears forward, tail low, weight centered. No growl this time, but there was something sharper in his eyes. Focus, not fear. A memory flickered there, like he was hearing footsteps only he recognized. Buddy. Logan muttered quietly. It's daylight. Take a break. Brutus didn't move. Logan set the mug down, the ceramic tapping lightly against the table. The sound should have felt normal. It didn't. The cabin carried every noise too clearly, as if empty space had meaning. He walked slowly toward the dog, one hand brushing the old stone of the hearth. The air here was wrong. He could feel it now without needing Brutus to tell him. A cold draft where no draft should be. A faint metallic smell, so faint he could have imagined it. Brutus didn't lift his head, just narrowed his eyes at the base of the hearth. Okay, Logan whispered. Talk to me. But Brutus didn't talk. He never did. He warned. Logan leaned his shoulder against the wall, trying to slow his thoughts. He had felt this exact tension before, in a half-collapsed compound north of Kabul. He and Brutus had been sweeping a courtyard at dusk when the dog froze in that same rigid stance. 30 seconds later, they found a tripwire stretched between 2 burned door frames. That silence, that stillness, had saved the whole unit. Brutus only reacted when something mattered. Logan knelt beside the dog and rubbed his flank. Brutus's muscles were warm and taut, alert but not panicked. That was the difference. Brutus didn't panic. Panic got people killed. "You smell someone," Logan said, "or something they left behind." A gust of wind slammed against the back door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Logan jolted instinctively, but Brutus didn't flinch. He simply turned his head toward the door, eyes cutting sharp, posture shifting a fraction to account for a second threat. 2 points of focus, the fireplace and the door. Logan swallowed. Someone was here, he whispered. The thought didn't come from fear. It came from the way the cabin's silence felt stretched, like something had been removed or someone had left recently. He could never explain this part of his instincts to anyone back home. In Afghanistan, you learned to hear absence the same way you heard gunfire. He pushed to his feet and crossed to the table, where he'd left a stack of papers he found under the sink the night before. Old property notes, leftover receipts, a brittle folder from the cabin's previous owner. He flipped through the yellowed pages, searching for anything that might make sense of Brutus's behavior. One sheet caught his eye. A handwritten note at the bottom of an inspection report. Avoid the old shaft lines near the cabin. Do not use the well behind the ridge. 1964 incident is sealed. Let it stay sealed. Logan read it twice. Sealed was a strange word to use for a mine accident. Accidents were documented, investigated, explained. Sealed implied deliberate silence. He dug deeper through the papers. More references, broken sentences, little warnings written like afterthoughts. Locals don't go near Silver Elk. Water table changed after the collapse. No one should have survived that blast. Logan felt a tight chill crawl up his spine, the kind that had nothing to do with winter. Brutus suddenly stiffened again, this time staring at the door with a hard, low breath. Logan moved fast, grabbing his jacket and stepping toward the window beside the back entry. He lifted the curtain an inch. Snow drifted past the glass. Only trees, only white, only silence. But he trusted the dog more than his own eyes. Logan backed away and crouched beside Brutus. "All right," he murmured. "Something's off. I get it." Brutus's gaze returned to the fireplace, sharper now, as if he were expecting the stone to breathe. Logan's pulse tightened. That cavity behind the hearth hadn't been a fluke. Someone placed a metal box there 60 years ago. Someone sealed it with intention, and someone else might want it to stay hidden. He opened the first notebook again, flipping past the early entries. After a few pages, the tone changed. The handwriting pressed harder into the paper. Movement near the rear of the cabin. Same man as last week. Watches the mine at night. Thinks I don't see him. Water samples show contamination again. Levels rising. I'm close. Too close. If something happens to me, tell the truth. Or burn the place down. Brutus let out a sudden, sharp exhale, a sound that Logan recognized instantly. It wasn't a warning growl. It wasn't fear. It was the sound Brutus made right before finding explosives hidden beneath a buried tarp. A tiny breath that signaled precision. Focus. Confirmation. Logan felt the room shift around him. He stood, paced once, and stopped in the center of the cabin. He listened. Not to noise, but to the absence of noise, to the cabin's heartbeat, to the cold pressing against the windows. Something had been trapped here. Or someone. Logan picked up the notebook and rapped his knuckles against the stone beside the hearth, lightly this time, listening for echoes. One spot sounded different. A deeper pit beneath the floor, slanted toward old mine tunnels. Brutus didn't take his eyes off that exact point. Someone hid more than a box. Logan said, "Didn't they, boy?" Brutus's tail twitched once in agreement. Then, as if the mountain wanted to answer, the back door latch clicked. Just a whisper of metal shifting under pressure. Logan froze. Brutus's head snapped toward it, teeth baring but silent. Logan's blood turned to ice. No wind had touched that door. He crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed the crowbar, and positioned himself between Brutus and the entryway. The cabin held its breath again. The only sound was Brutus's controlled breathing beside him. Logan waited. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. But the fact that Brutus didn't relax told him everything he needed to know. They weren't alone up here. Something from 60 years ago was still moving, still watching, still waiting. And Brutus had felt it first. The storm had settled into a steady hiss against the roof by the time Logan drifted into an uneasy sleep. Brutus lay near the hearth, chin on his paws, eyes half open in that strange state between rest and readiness he'd perfected during deployments. The fire had burned itself to a faint orange glow, enough to sketch their shadows across the cabin walls. It was close to midnight when Logan woke to a sound that didn't belong. Scratching. Precise. Rhythmic. Not at the door. Not outside. Inside. At the base of the fireplace. Logan sat up fast, adrenaline slamming through the fog of sleep. Brutus was already on his feet, paws clawing deliberate lines into the mortar between the stones. His shoulders were tight, his breath sharp through his nose. This wasn't nervous digging. This was work. Purpose. "Brutus," Logan whispered, voice low. "What do you see?" The dog paused just long enough to flick his gaze at Logan, then struck the same spot again, harder. Dust lifted from the stones, like a thin breath escaping the wall. Logan grabbed his flashlight and knelt beside him. His fingers brushed across cold rock, then stopped dead. A line. Clean. Too clean. He leaned closer. The rectangle had been carved into the mortar with careful hands. Not cracked by time. Sealed. Hidden. Exactly like the stone he'd removed the night before, but this one was larger, older, and much deeper. A chill ran up his spine. Someone really didn't want this opened? Brutus stepped back, giving him space, but his eyes never left the stone. Logan wedged the crowbar into the seam. The first push didn't budge it. The second barely shifted the surface. On the third, the stone groaned, a long grinding sound that vibrated through the floor. Brutus braced himself, muscles rigid. The mortar snapped. The slab came loose. Logan hauled it forward, the weight nearly pulling his arm from its socket. When it hit the floor, the sound felt wrong, like something falling in a tomb. Behind it was a cavity deeper than the first. Maybe 3 feet, lined with hand-cut stone, dry as bone, and filled. Logan angled the flashlight inside. A military-issue metal case, heavy steel, the old kind, olive paint flaking off its edges. Next to it, 3 leather notebooks tied with thick thread, cracked from age. Underneath, rolled tight in twine, a mining map printed on yellowed drafting paper. Brutus let out a low breath that sounded almost like confirmation. Logan reached in and pulled everything out, setting them gently on the floor. The metal box thudded like it held more weight than it should. He didn't open it yet. The notebooks were lighter, softer. He lifted the first one, thumb brushing the worn leather. Neat handwriting on the first page. Howard McLean Mining Engineer, Silver Elk Operations, June 3rd, 1963. Logan blinked. The name was familiar, a whisper from the papers he'd read earlier. McLean was the engineer who vanished, the one the town refused to talk about, the one whose death certificate had been labeled unconfirmed. 60 years gone, no body found. Logan turned the page. June 5th. They think the collapse in the old shafts is natural, but the measurements don't add up. Pressure readings spiked before the blast. Something is moving under there. June 12th. Barrels delivered after midnight. No markings. The foreman lied about their contents. June 14th. Found traces in groundwater near Shaft 8. Animals know before people do. Then ink thicker, pressed deeper. June 20th. They buried the truth once. They will do it again. If you find this, don't trust the man guarding the ridge. Logan exhaled slowly, the hair on his forearms rising. There was a second journal, then a third. Different years, different tones. The last entry in the final notebook stopped him cold. October 9th, 1964. They choked Shaft 9 with concrete. I saw what they dragged out before they sealed it. It wasn't rock. It wasn't earth. If someone ever finds this, be careful with the gatekeeper. They won't let the past stay dug up. Brutus stiffened again, muzzle angling toward the back window, as if he heard footsteps under the snow. Logan reached for his rifle without thinking, finger resting along the guard. The night outside was quiet. Too quiet. He turned back to the cavity. Something else was tucked in the corner. He reached in slowly, fingers brushing metal. A small brass tag. Logan pulled it into the light. Silver Elk Mine Gatekeeper's badge, numbered to 14. A badge. Old, tarnished, with a faint smear of dried brown across the back. Brutus stepped forward, nose touching the badge once before he pulled back, ears pinned. Whatever McLean had meant by gatekeeper was not a metaphor. Logan stood, pulse hammering. He swept the flashlight over the cavity one more time. This wasn't a hiding place. It was a message. And McLean hadn't sealed this for the mine. He'd sealed it for whoever came after. Logan swallowed hard. 60 years, he whispered. And someone thought this was worth burying alive. Brutus looked from the notebooks to the dark fireplace, then to the back door again, as if connecting dots Logan hadn't caught yet. You're telling me it's not over, Logan said quietly. Brutus didn't growl, didn't bark, just held his gaze with the steadiness of a soldier who had already decided the fight was real. Outside, snow shifted on the trees. A faint, distant crack echoed across the dark ridge. Logan tightened his grip on the crowbar. The first clue hadn't just opened a wall, it had opened 60 years of silence, and it wasn't going to stay silent for long. By sunrise, Logan knew the cabin was no longer the place to ask questions. Too many shadows, too much silence that didn't feel like silence. Brutus paced along the back wall, nose pressed low, following a line only he could read. Logan knelt beside him and brushed away snow that had drifted in through a cracked window frame. Footprints. Not his. Not from last night. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. Someone had walked behind the cabin after midnight. Brutus's ears pinned back, the old soldier instinct igniting in his eyes. Logan felt the same heat climb his spine. He had been watched before, overseas, on streets where every window was a threat. The feeling had its own smell. Metallic, tight, heavy behind the ribs. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and clipped Brutus's leash to his collar. "We're getting answers," he said. "Somewhere people still talk." The town of Silver Elk Ridge sat 9 miles down a winding road, past pine stands scarred by old mining blasts. The kind of place where every truck had rust from road salt, and every porch had a rocking chair that had seen too many winters. Logan parked outside the municipal library, a squat brick building with a fading mural of miners painted on its side. Brutus hopped out quietly, sniffing the air. No tension now, no warning, just working. Inside, the library was warm and smelled of old paper and lemon oil. A woman behind the main desk looked up from a stack of donated books, white hair twisted into a loose bun, eyes sharp enough to read a man's life without opening a file. "You're new," she said, "and that's a working dog, not the emotional support type people claim to get their pets into the grocery store." Logan managed a faint smile. He earned every stripe. Name's Logan Hale. I'm renting the old cabin near the ridge. Her expression shifted. Not fear, something closer to recognition. That place finally sold, she murmured. For $200, I imagine. Brutus sniffed her hand gently, as if confirming she wasn't a threat. She nodded toward him with a soft admiration. He knows more than most folks around here. He usually does, Logan replied. I'm looking for information. Old records, mining reports, anything from 1964. Quote, posture tightened at the year. Most of those files are sealed or missing, she said. But I suppose someone ought to know the truth before that mine swallows another century. She led him to a back table cluttered with maps, yellowed newspapers, and a binder stuffed with clipped articles. She opened it to a page titled Silver Elk Disaster. A grainy photograph showed workers digging through collapsed rock. Official cause, Evelyn said, tapping the page, was a structural failure. But that wasn't the real story. Logan watched her carefully. What was? She hesitated, then glanced toward Brutus, who had taken up position by the door, listening to every movement outside, like he was filtering danger from background noise. Howard McLean worked here, she said. Smart man. Too smart. He took notes on groundwater contamination years before anyone cared. He told folks the company was dumping chemicals in the shaft systems. People didn't like hearing that, and the company liked it even less. Logan felt the pull in his chest again. They tried to bury him. Some said he vanished. Evelyn continued. Some said he fell, but he kept journals, proof, samples, evidence the mine was poisoning the valley long before the collapse. Logan slid one of McLean's notebooks from his pack and placed it on the table. Evelyn inhaled sharply. You found them, she whispered. After all this time. He hid more beneath the cabin, Logan said. Not just journals, maps, a badge. Evelyn's eyes widened. The gatekeeper's badge. Logan stiffened. You know what it means. Everyone old enough to remember whispers about a man hired by the company. Paid to guard the site. Paid to silence anyone who came near Shaft 9. My father said people used to cross the street when he walked by. Before Logan could respond, Brutus growled. Not loud. Low. Controlled. A vibration against the hardwood floor. Logan turned. The dog had moved to the window, shoulders squared, his gaze locked on something outside. What do you see? Logan murmured, stepping closer. Brutus didn't blink. His tail stiffened. Logan followed the dog's stare through the window. A man stood across the street beside a green pickup, hood up, pretending to check the engine. But his eyes were not on the truck. They were on Logan. Evelyn whispered, Do you know him? No, Logan said, but he knows me. The man closed the truck hood slowly, too slowly. Then he stepped back into the cab and drove off without looking away from the library. Brutus's growl stayed in his chest long after the truck disappeared. Logan felt the weight of McLean's last words pressing against him. Be careful with the gatekeeper. Someone was watching the mine, watching the ridge, and now watching Logan. He turned back to Evelyn. I need the old mine maps, everything you have on Shaft 9. She hesitated, but nodded. Be careful, she said softly. Some people in this town spent 60 years making sure the past stayed buried. Logan glanced at Brutus. Too late, he said. It's already waking up. As Logan and Brutus stepped out into the cold, fresh snow revealed a new set of tire tracks right behind his truck. Someone had been waiting for him. Brutus lowered his head, nose skimming the snow, tracking the scent with attention Logan hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Yeah, Logan whispered. I smell it too. The hunt had already begun. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual, the kind of drive where every bend in the road pressed a little harder against the ribs. Logan gripped the wheel, replaying Evelyn's warning and the way the stranger outside the library had watched him. Brutus sat upright in the back seat, head high, breathing slow and steady. Not anxious. Working. When the cabin finally appeared through the pines, half buried in snow, Brutus let out a soft huff, the kind he used when something had changed in a familiar environment. Logan slowed immediately. Nothing looked broken. The door was still closed, no windows shattered. But the snow in front of the steps was disturbed, a faint path leading toward the back. "Someone's been here," Logan said quietly. Brutus already knew. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly different. Not wrong, not dangerous, just touched. As if someone had walked through the room without leaving sound behind. Brutus went straight to the table where Logan had left the metal box, checked it with a slow sweep of his nose, then shot a glance at the hearth. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been moved. Whoever came in knew exactly what not to touch. Logan sat down at the table and pulled the metal box closer. The case opened with a stiff groan, hinges rusted but intact. Inside lay a collection of small vials sealed with wax. Some held soil, some held water. All were labeled in the same precise handwriting as McLean's journals. Logan lifted one. Soil from shaft 7. Dark as oil. He unscrewed the cap gently and smelled the faint metallic sting inside. Another vial contained cloudy water that still had a yellowish tint, even after 60 years. He unfolded a packet of papers beneath the vials. Lab results, chemistry data from 1964. The numbers punched him harder than expected. Mercury levels 12 times higher than acceptable. Arsenic traces, benzene contamination, evidence of industrial solvents buried deep in the mine's groundwater system. Logan closed his eyes for a moment. He could picture it, the company cutting corners, dumping waste, poisoning the valley just to save money. And McLean had tested it, documented it, tried to warn people. He flipped to another sheet. Handwritten. Jagged. They laughed at me at council. Called me paranoid. Told me to get off company property. Told me to leave it alone. If I disappear, it wasn't an accident. Check shaft 9. Check the old blast chambers. They buried something that wasn't rock. Logan exhaled slowly. The words weren't hysterical. They were measured, written by someone who knew he was running out of time. He reached for the mining map, smoothing the fragile paper across the table. Shaft numbers were circled in red. Most scribbled out. Only one left untouched, marked with thick black ink. The number looked like a warning. Brutus suddenly stiffened, head turning toward the back door. Logan froze. The dog's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Then he moved to the window, paws quiet on the wood. "What is it?" Logan whispered. Brutus didn't growl, didn't bark. He lifted his nose slightly, scenting the air. Someone had been standing right outside. Logan gripped the edge of the table, pulse tightening. Whoever watched his cabin wasn't trying to break in or steal the journals. They were watching for something else. Waiting. He stood, grabbed the map, and slung his coat over his shoulders. Brutus was already at the door, muscles coiled. "We're going to the mine," Logan said. The wind stung as they stepped outside. Brutus moved ahead, following the faint trail of footprints left behind by whoever had come earlier. The tracks led around the cabin, then faded into the trees, swallowed by drifting snow. But Brutus didn't stop. His pace quickened as they reached a narrow path that wound toward the base of the ridge, where the Silver Elk mine lay quiet and empty. The closer they got, the colder the air felt. Not the natural kind. The kind that lived inside abandoned places where memories sank deeper than the cold. Brutus stopped suddenly, head snapping toward a slope of disturbed earth near a collapsed vent shaft. Logan crouched, brushed away the snow. Freshly turned soil. Someone had dug here recently. Not days ago. Hours. He checked the map. This spot sat directly above a tunnel feeding into Shaft 9. Brutus circled the disturbed earth, nose deep, breathing sharp. His whole posture changed. Shoulders forward, tail rigid. He wasn't just alert, he was tracking. Someone's already been looking for what McLean left, Logan said. He scanned the ridge. Trees stood still. Snow fell soft. No movement, but shadows stretched long near the mine entrance, the kind of shadows that didn't come from trees. Brutus looked up at him. Logan could read the message in the dog's eyes. We're being watched. Logan stepped closer to the disturbed earth, pushing his fingers into the loose soil. He pulled up a broken shard of plastic. A handle. Bright red. Not old. Not from mining tools. A gas can spout. Someone had been preparing to burn something. Destroy evidence. Either here or at the cabin. Plot twist hit him fast. Timing too deliberate. Too perfect. The stranger at the library hadn't been curious. He'd been checking how close Logan was getting. Brutus let out a slow, rising growl that rumbled through the trees. Logan turned toward the mine entrance. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of footsteps deeper inside. Someone had gone in. Someone who didn't want Shaft 9 opened. Logan knelt beside Brutus, resting a hand on his back. You were right, he whispered. This wasn't buried and forgotten. Someone's been guarding it. Brutus pushed forward, ready to lead. Logan stared into the dark tunnel, heart pounding. 60 years of silence hadn't been an accident. Someone was still protecting the truth. And now, Logan and Brutus were standing on the line between secrecy and exposure, facing a threat that had survived longer than any witness. Let's find out what McLean died for, Logan said. Brutus took the first step into the shadows, unafraid, a soldier stepping back into war. 6 snowfall muted the world around the cabin that night. Thick flakes drifted down in slow curtains, settling on the roof and smothering every sound under a soft, white hush. Logan sat at the table, sorting the last of McLean's vials into sealed bags. Brutus lay beside the hearth, half dozing, half listening in that way he always had. One ear twitched at every creak of timber, every shift of wind. Logan felt the tension before he understood it. A pressure, a tightening in the air. Brutus sensed it a second earlier. His head lifted, his eyes locked on the front door. His breathing changed, low and deliberate. What is it, boy? Brutus rose, stiff and alert. The hair along his spine lifted in a slow ridge. Then the first strike hit. Glass shattered as something crashed through the front window. It bounced once on the wood floor, spinning, then erupted into flame. Fire tore upward, licking the curtains in an instant. A second bottle followed, smashing against the far wall. The cabin burst alive with heat and smoke. Logan dove for the satchel of evidence. Brutus, out! But Brutus wasn't running. He lunged toward the door instead, snarling as shadows moved outside. A figure kicked the door open. Firelight behind Logan threw the man's silhouette into a monstrous outline. Dark jacket. Mask. Weapon raised. Brutus hit him first. The impact slammed the man into the snow outside. Logan grabbed his rifle, rolled behind the overturned chair, and fired a warning shot toward the tree line. 2 more shadows broke from cover, spreading out with practiced precision. This wasn't a random attack. This was an operation. More fire poured across the cabin walls. The wooden beams crackled under the heat. Smoke clawed up Logan's throat, choking him. He crawled towards the door. Brutus, fall back! Brutus released the downed attacker only when the man reached for his weapon again. He snapped once, forcing the man's hand open, then turned and ran back toward Logan. A gunshot rang out. Brutus jerked mid-stride, stumbled, but kept going. The bullet had grazed him along the ribs, cutting a burning line through his fur. Logan caught him at the threshold, hands sliding under his weight. "Easy, buddy. I've got you." But this wasn't over. A voice shouted from the darkness. Not masked, not disguised. "Hale, drop the evidence and step outside." Logan froze. He knew that voice. He stepped out just far enough to see the man approaching through the wall of smoke and drifting snow. Sheriff David Coleman. Not in uniform, wearing a heavy coat, shoulders squared, jaw set the way men do when they've crossed a line they can't walk back from. Logan's throat tightened. "Sheriff, you're behind this?" Coleman stepped closer. Snow whirled around him, lit orange by the burning cabin behind Logan. "My father ran Silver Elk." Coleman said, "Back when the mine was the only thing keeping this town alive. McLean threatened that. He wanted a shutdown, wanted investigations. My father couldn't let that happen." Logan's grip tightened on Brutus. "So you helped bury him?" Coleman's eyes flickered, not with shame, just exhaustion. "I was 16. I carried the lantern while the men sealed Shaft 9. They told me McLean had slipped, told me it had to stay quiet. The mine was everything." The heat roared behind Logan. Flames crackled against the roof beam. Sparks drifted past his face. Coleman lifted his gun. "And you weren't supposed to find that cabin. It was never meant to be sold." Logan's chest burned, not just from smoke, but from the realization. The tax auction, the low price, the way the clerk refused to make eye contact. They hadn't expected anyone to buy the land. They expected it to rot forever. "You could have let it die with you," Logan said, "but you chose this." Coleman shook his head. "I chose to keep my family's hands clean. 60 years of silence, Hale. You weren't supposed to dig." Brutus growled low, even through the pain. Coleman leveled his gun. In that moment, Logan shifted his weight. He whispered, "Brutus." "Now." The dog launched sideways with everything left in him, knocking Logan clear as Coleman fired. The bullet tore through the doorframe. Logan rolled into the snow, grabbed Brutus, and pushed into the darkness beyond the cabin. Coleman shouted for his men, but the fire drowned his voice. The flames finally consumed the roof, collapsing inward with a thunderous crack. Burning timber rained down, swallowing everything inside. Logan sprinted through the trees, half dragging, half carrying Brutus. The dog's breath puffed in sharp bursts. He wasn't whining. He never did. But his weight leaned heavier against Logan than usual. Behind them, Coleman yelled commands. Flashlights cut through the trees. Snow churned beneath boots. The hunt was on. Logan ducked behind an outcropping of rocks, pressing Brutus against his chest. The dog looked up at him, eyes bright, steady. "You saved me again," Logan whispered. Brutus nudged his chin once, defiant even while bleeding. Flames from the collapsing cabin lit the sky. Black smoke curled into the falling snow, rising over the pines. Logan watched the place burn, jaw tight. They tried to bury McLean. Now they wanted to bury him too. He ran his hand over Brutus's neck. "They're not silencing us. Not tonight." Brutus pushed himself upright, limping but ready. Together they disappeared deeper into the frozen woods, leaving the burning cabin behind them, with 60 years of secrets turning to ash in the falling snow. The sun never truly rose that morning. It dragged itself up behind a wall of snow clouds, turning the world into a grey, frozen hush. Logan crouched beside Brutus under a rocky overhang deep in the timberline, the two of them half buried in wind-blown drifts. Brutus rested his head on Logan's thigh, breathing shallow but steady, The bandage around his ribs darkened with blood. "You hold on," Logan murmured, fingers steady despite the cold. "We're not done yet." Brutus blinked once, slow but certain, the kind of look he used to give before stepping onto a live battlefield. Logan reached for the sat phone he'd wrapped in cloth to protect it from the cold. His thumb hovered for half a second. Then he dialed. "Maya Rourke." A voice answered on the second ring, crisp and awake despite the hour. Logan closed his eyes. "It's Hale." There was a beat of silence. "Logan, I haven't heard from you in 3 years. You sound like hell. What happened?" "I've got evidence of a cover-up at the Silver Elk mine. Environmental contamination, corporate burying, a missing engineer named Howard McLean, and the sheriff is involved." Another pause, then a click of pure focus. "Tell me where you are." "I already sent you everything," Logan said. "Journals, soil samples, analysis reports. It's all in your inbox." Maya swore under her breath. "Hale, this is huge. This is criminal-level huge. I'm alerting DOJ and the EPA task force right now. Don't move. I'm bringing backup." The line went dead as she hung up. Brutus shifted, letting out a low exhale. Logan stroked his head. "They're coming, boy. Just stay with me." For the first time in days, Logan allowed himself to sit back, to breathe, to let exhaustion bleed into the cold around him. Brutus pressed closer, warm despite the snow. Hours later the sound came. A distant thumping, low at first, then growing. Helicopter blades. Not one, several. Logan stood, weakness pulling at his ribs, but adrenaline forcing him upright. Through the trees, the clearing below filled with movement. Federal SUVs rolled in along the snow-packed road. Agents in dark jackets poured out, forming quick perimeter lines. EPA hazmat specialists unloaded gear cases as another helicopter descended, kicking up a white vortex of powder. Logan stepped forward, Brutus limping at his side. Maya Rourke climbed out of a DOJ helicopter, hair whipped sideways by the wind. She spotted Logan instantly. "Jesus, Hale," she breathed, rushing to him. "You look like you crawled out of a war zone." Logan cracked the smallest smile. "Not far off." Her eyes dropped to Brutus. "He hurt?" "He saved my life." Logan's voice caught. Again. 2 agents rushed over with a stretcher. Brutus resisted for a moment, pride stiffening his muscles, but Logan knelt and whispered, "Let them help, buddy. You earned the rest." Only then did the dog relent, allowing them to lift him carefully. Logan kept a hand on his flank as they carried him toward the med tent being assembled near the clearing. Across the roadway, the commotion shifted. A line of agents was escorting someone out of a patrol cruiser. Sheriff David Coleman. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his face pale. Snow clung to his collar, melting down into the fabric as if the cold itself wanted to seep into him. The town had gathered along the edge of the road, drawn by the helicopters and sirens. They whispered, stared, recoiled. One elderly man yelled, voice cracking with betrayal, "Your father promised us that mine was safe." Coleman didn't respond. He didn't look at anyone. His gaze was fixed on the ground as if the weight of 60 years had finally collapsed onto his shoulders. When he turned slightly, he saw Logan. For 1 second, their eyes locked through the snow. Coleman's expression crumpled. Not anger, something closer to resignation. A man who had spent his whole life protecting a lie inherited long before he had a choice. Logan didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Justice had already begun its work. As Coleman was loaded into the federal transport, Maya stepped beside Logan, arms crossed tight against the cold. "Your evidence lined up perfectly with old unsolved EPA complaints," she said. "McLean had everything he needed to take the mine down. That's why they silenced him." "And his family?" Logan asked. "We'll give them answers, real ones." Logan nodded, letting out a breath he'd been holding since the day he stepped into the cabin. A medic approached. "Sir, your dog's stable. The wound wasn't as deep as it looked. He's tough." Logan closed his eyes for a long moment. "Yeah," he whispered. "He always has been." Snow drifted around him, cold yet somehow lighter than before. The forest no longer felt like a hiding place. The cabin ruins behind them no longer felt like a grave. For the first time in years, Logan wasn't running from anything. He turned toward the med tent where Brutus lay, wrapped in blankets, tail giving a weak but deliberate thump when he saw him. Logan walked to him, placed a hand on his strong chest, and let the warmth of that steady heartbeat ground him. "You did it," Logan murmured. "We both did." The storm eased. The town watched. Justice moved. And amid the falling snow, Logan Hale finally stood still, not as a man haunted by the past, but as someone who had survived it. Spring came late in the mountains, almost reluctant after the winter that had nearly killed them. The air softened first. Then the snow thinned. Then, one morning, sunlight broke across the ridge in a way that felt like a promise being kept. Logan stepped onto the porch of the rebuilt cabin, coffee steaming in his hand, breath visible in the crisp morning air. The new structure wasn't elegant. It wasn't meant to be. Cedar beams, sturdy stone hearth, metal roof that hummed when the wind moved through the valley. A home built from his own hands and the ashes of a truth that had refused to stay buried. And lying there on the top step, like a sentinel carved out of muscle and memory, was Brutus. The German shepherd was older now. His fur carried streaks of grey around the muzzle. His gait had slowed, the injury from the fire leaving a faint hitch in his stride. But his eyes were sharp, steady. The eyes of a soldier who had survived both war and the quiet after it. He no longer scanned every shadow like a threat, but he watched the tree line with the calm awareness of someone who had earned peace. Logan brushed his fingers through Brutus's fur. "Morning, old man." Brutus answered with a low huff, tail tapping twice on the wood. The world around them had changed. Word of the Silver Elk scandal had swept across the region for months, then faded the way all news eventually did. But the town didn't forget. They couldn't. Federal teams had fenced off Shaft 9, transforming it into an environmental recovery site. Soil remediation crews worked through the winter, stripping away tainted layers and testing water tables McLean had warned about 60 years ago. The EPA posted weekly updates. Photos of the cleanup were pinned at the town hall. People began leaving small offerings near the mine entrance, flowers, handwritten notes, a few left candles on the anniversary of the disaster. No one talked about curses or ghosts anymore. They talked about the truth, and how long it had waited. Logan started picking up shifts with the county mountain rescue team, something he hadn't imagined doing when he first arrived, broken and trying to disappear. He liked the work, the clarity of it, a missing hiker, a stranded family, an overturned ATV, problems that needed action, not politics. Brutus rode along whenever he could, lying in the back of the truck with his head against the window, ears twitching at every trail he remembered. The team called Brutus the Old Lieutenant. He didn't bark much anymore, but when he did, they listened. One afternoon, Logan returned from a rescue call to find a small crowd gathered by the cabin. Kids, mostly. A few parents. Someone had put up a wooden sign near the fence, carved by hand. Brutus Overlook. Logan froze for a moment, reading the letters twice. A boy stepped forward. "We, thought he deserved something. For what he did. For everything he found." Brutus, sitting beside Logan, lifted his head as if he understood the ceremony of the moment. His chest puffed slightly, proud but reserved, the way he always had been. Logan knelt beside him and whispered, Looks like you've got fans. Brutus leaned his head into Logan's shoulder, a gesture soft enough to be rare. Later, after the crowd left, Evelyn Ward from the library stopped by with a stack of old clippings. "People should know the full story," she said. "I'm planning a historical bulletin, something children can read in school, not the old version, the true one." She placed the papers in Logan's hand. Her eyes shone with something close to gratitude. "McLean tried to save this valley. You finished what he started." Logan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Brutus lifted himself, slow but purposeful, and walked toward Evelyn, nudging her wrist with his nose. She laughed, wiping away a tear. That evening, the sky lit in streaks of gold and faded rose. Logan sat on the porch, Brutus curled beside him, heavy head resting on Logan's boot. A breeze drifted through the pines, the kind that didn't sound like warning anymore. It sounded like breath. Logan opened one of McLean's journals he had kept, not to study, just to remember. The last entry read differently now, less like a warning, more like a passing of responsibility. It stayed with him long after the sunset faded. Brutus shifted again, pressing closer. Logan reached down, scratching the scarred patch along his ribs. "You kept us alive," he whispered. "Now you're keeping this place alive, too." Brutus didn't look at him. He didn't need to. His tail tapped once. Then he breathed out, slow and deep, settling into the quiet of a valley, finally free of shadows. In that stillness, Logan understood something he hadn't grasped until now. The danger had passed. The truth had surfaced. But healing was its own kind of mission. He looked out at the mountains glowing under the new season's light. And for the first time in a long time, he believed they had earned it. The wind carried the scent of spring mud and pine sap across the hillside, drifting lazily around the rebuilt cabin. Logan heard the crunch of tires on gravel before he saw the van turning into the clearing. Through the windshield, he spotted a dozen faces pressed toward the glass, wide-eyed and curious. The Silver Elk High School History Club. He took a slow breath. He still wasn't used to visitors, especially not ones with backpacks, clipboards, and boundless teenage energy. Brutus, resting on the porch step, lifted his head at the sound. His ears didn't snap up the way they once had. Now they rose halfway, listening but no longer on guard. The van door slid open. Kids spilled out, excited whispers carrying across the clearing. "That's him. And that's the dog. He looks bigger in the photos. No, that's definitely him." Their teacher, Mrs. Delaney, stepped forward, smoothing her jacket and adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Hale, thank you for agreeing to this. The district is putting together a community history project, and your story is, well, essential." Logan gave a small nod. "Just Logan is fine. And we're not much of a story." Mrs. Delaney smiled knowingly. "Let us be the judge of that." The kids gathered around the porch. Some gazed at the cabin with awe, others at Brutus with something closer to reverence. The dog shifted, pushing himself into a sitting position with deliberate dignity. His joints protested the weight, but he did it anyway. The first boy to step forward looked barely 16. Freckles, nervous hands, a notebook pressed against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Logan, can I ask the first question?" Logan gestured for him to go ahead. "Shoot." The boy swallowed. "What did you think that night when Brutus found the iron box? I mean, the whole town walked past it for 60 years. How did he know?" Brutus looked at the boy, steady and unblinking, as if he understood every word. Logan let the silence stretch a moment. Snowmelt dripped from the porch roof in slow intervals. Somewhere in the trees, a woodpecker hammered a distant rhythm. Then Logan spoke, voice low but firm. "He wasn't looking for danger. he said. He was looking for the truth. A few of the students scribbled those words down immediately, as if they were more important than any date or fact they had learned at school. Mrs. Delaney stepped closer. Is it true McLean left maps? That he predicted the contamination? That he tried to warn everyone? Logan nodded. He paid for it, but he didn't give up on the truth, even when no one listened. Another student chimed in, a girl with a camera strapped around her neck. And Brutus found it. After all that time? Logan looked down at the old shepherd. Brutus's muzzle had whitened. His eyes were cloudier now, but still bright with the kind of awareness that had saved Logan more times than he could count. Brutus did what he's always done, Logan said. He paid attention. He never ignored what the world was trying to tell him. Brutus huffed once, a soft chuff that made a few of the kids smile. Mrs. Delaney motioned to one of the boys holding a small recorder. Tell Logan what you're working on. The boy's eyes lit up. It's a digital archive for our local history site. We're including the journals you found, the photos from the investigation, even a section on how the EPA cleaned up Shaft 9. And... He hesitated, glancing at Brutus. And a whole chapter on him. Logan raised an eyebrow. A chapter? A big one, the boy said, confidence returning. We're calling it The Dog Who Dug Up the Truth. A ripple of laughter ran through the group. Logan couldn't help smiling. Brutus, however, sat perfectly still, as if accepting the honor with solemn grace. The kids asked more questions, about the night of the fire, about Sheriff Coleman, about why Logan had bought the cabin in the first place. He answered what he could, sidestepping the parts that still lived in the darker corners of his memory. Then one girl asked something softer, quieter. Did finding the truth help you? I mean, personally? Logan looked out across the valley, at the ridge where the cabin had once burned, at the trail where Brutus had led him through smoke and snow, at the mountains beyond, washed clean by evening sun. It helped me understand, he said slowly, that some ghosts only go quiet when you face them, and that some truths take a long time to climb out of the ground. The girl nodded, writing that down too. They stayed another half hour, asking questions, snapping photos of Brutus, tracing the carved sign that read, Brutus Overlook. Some even left small dog treats on the porch step, which Brutus sniffed politely but did not eat. He was too proud to accept gifts from strangers, even admirers. When they finally loaded back into the van, Mrs. Delaney lingered. Logan, she said softly, these kids, they needed this. They needed to see that history isn't just facts in a book. It's choices people make. It's courage. It's loss. It's dogs like yours. She smiled, eyes warm. Thank you. Logan watched the van pull away, disappearing down the dusty road. He sank onto the porch beside Brutus. The dog leaned gently against his leg, the same way he had leaned against him on battlefield sand and winter snow. You've got your name in a history project, Logan murmured. Not bad for an old soldier. Brutus exhaled deeply, eyes drifting shut. Logan rested his hand on the dog's chest, feeling the slow, loyal heartbeat beneath his palm. Legacy wasn't something you claimed. It was something you left behind, and Brutus had left more than most men ever would. The last light of day slid across the mountain ridge like a slow tide of gold, spilling over the rebuilt cabin and settling into the cracks of the porch where Logan sat with a blanket draped loosely over his shoulders. The air was cool, scented with pine and the faint mineral tang that always drifted down from the old mine site. The world felt suspended, held in a rare hush that came only when the mountains decided the day was done. Brutus lay stretched out beside him, one paw hanging off the porch step, his breathing deep and steady. His eyes were closed, but not in surrender. In rest. The kind of rest earned after a lifetime of watching, protecting, understanding things long before any human could. His ears, though, were still awake. One twitched at a rustle in the brush. Another flicked at the call of a distant elk. Age had dulled nothing about the way he listened. Logan tilted the small flask in his hand, pouring a quiet splash of whiskey into the tin cup resting between his boots. He raised it toward the fading sun. "To Howard McLean," he murmured. "A man the world forgot too soon." He took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of memory. The night Brutus clawed at the hearthstone, the explosion of fire, Coleman's confession, the long walk through the snow while Brutus bled but refused to fall, the moment federal agents hauled truth out of the shadows and put it into daylight. Logan set the cup down and looked at the dog. "You know," he whispered, "people think you were looking for trouble that night." Brutus didn't open his eyes, but he let out a soft rumble of breath. Logan smiled. "But they're wrong. You weren't searching for danger. You were searching for the truth." A breeze rolled across the valley, cool and gentle. It lifted the edge of the blanket and brushed Brutus's fur, carrying that familiar scent of pine and old stone toward the horizon. The wooden sign at the start of the trail, Silver Elk Ridge, creaked softly as the wind passed over it. Then footsteps crunched in the distance. Logan glanced down the path. A lone hiker, probably headed toward the overlook, paused when he noticed them on the porch. He lifted a hand in greeting. Logan nodded back. The man hesitated, as if recognizing the dog from a newspaper clipping or a historic bulletin, then moved on without intruding further. Brutus opened his eyes for just a moment, watched the figure disappear, then closed them again with slow confidence. Still guarding. Even in rest, the sun slipped behind the ridge, leaving only the ember glow of dusk, the kind of light that made the world look honest, stripped down to its bones. Logan leaned back, letting his breath fall into rhythm with Brutus's. "You kept this valley alive," he said quietly, "and me along with it." Another breeze, another rustle of the sign. The mountains settling into night. The camera of the world, if anyone had been watching, might have pulled back then. Back past the porch, past the cabin rebuilt from ruin, back across the ridge where McLean's truth had finally risen, back far enough to show the valley whole again, a place no longer buried in silence. Logan rested his hand on Brutus's chest, felt the slow, steady heartbeat beneath the fur. "Some dogs don't just guard you," he said softly. "They guard the truth." The stars blinked on, one by one, scattered across the vast Montana sky, the kind of sky that made even scars feel small. And if anyone listening had ever known a dog like Brutus, if they'd ever had a friend who waited at the door, who seemed to understand things you never said out loud, who had stood beside them on the worst days and made the world bearable again, then they already knew what Logan meant. The wind carried the last whisper across Silver Elk Ridge. What's your story with a loyal pet? If Brutus's journey moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of a four-legged guardian who once watched over your world, support our channel, German Shepherd, because stories like this deserve to be kept alive, and some truths deserve to be guarded.